The first step for both the Danu dress and the top is to cut out our fabric using our pattern pieces as templates. We're going to start with the bodice, front and back, which are both cut on the fold. Then we also need to cut out a mirrored set of sleeves and also our 2 straps. If you are doing the views with a skirt or a peplum, you can check the cut list on page 9 of your instructions. If you're unsure of the fit of this garment, you haven't made it before, it's a great idea to have a practice go with cheap fabric, upcycle something, and have a practice go of the pattern before you start making it properly. This will give you a chance to check the fit and also make any adjustments that you'd like to make to the length of the skirt and the sleeves. Once everything has been cut out, we can move on to stay stitching our curved sections of the bodice and also the top of the sleeve head. This will make sure that none of these sections warp as we're doing the next steps in sewing. Step 3 is to fold and press the top edge of the bodice. You're going to start by folding it over by 1 centimeter, pressing this, and then folding down again by 3 more centimeters and pressing this well. This means there'll be no raw edges on show, and this section creates where we have both the ruffle and the elastic casing. We now need to do 3 parallel lines of stitching across our folded fabric at the top of our bodice, both at the front and the back. We're going to start by edge stitching along the bottom of the folded edge, and then we're going to edge stitch at the very top of that folded edge to create a really nice clean top stitch line. Finally, we're going to measure our elastic and make sure that we have enough space to create an elastic casing. This final stitching row is going to be parallel to the other 2 lines, somewhere in the middle. I'm suggesting it should be between 2 to 5 millimeters bigger than your elastic is, and it should be able to feed your elastic through easily using a bodkin or a safety pin. Putting the elastic through the bottom section, not the top, but the bottom gap, means that you will have a ruffle at the top at both the front and the back of your bodice. We're going to switch gears a little bit now and move on to our shirring. Do your shirring before you've put your elastic into its casing so that the fabric is as flat as possible. This is so that your shirring will be as neat and as straight as you can possibly make it. For a more in-depth tutorial on how to actually shirr fabric, I have a video specifically on that I'll link above and below. If you'd like to check it out, it has lots of troubleshooting advice as well as everything you need to know to shirr successfully. We're going to shirr the entire back of our bodice. This is from just below the casing all the way down to the bottom. Feel free to leave about 1 centimeter at the bottom free so that it doesn't have any shirring in it when you attach it to the skirt or when you fold the bottom up, depending on which view you're making. To shirr the front bodice piece, we're going to start from the notches that are on the pattern, which you would have marked when you were cutting out the pattern pieces. And we're going to work in rows down to the bottom, again leaving about 1 centimeter gap at the very bottom for either folding up or attaching to our skirt or peplum. For my shirring, I like to work back and forth from one side across to the other side, not cutting my threads in between so that I have them all attached to each other, ready to be cut off by my overlocker. You can choose to space your shirring out however you'd like to. More shirring elastic or more rows together mean you're going to have a tighter fit of your shirred garment. Having bigger gaps between those rows means that it's going to be a looser fit. This is personal preference. I choose to just use my sewing machine presser foot as a guide for the distance between each of my rows. So I line up the previous row with the side of my presser foot and just sew along. So they're approximately 1/4 of an inch, a bit less than 1/2 centimeter apart. but they can also be 1 centimetre, 2, an inch. It's a completely personal choice, up to you what you would prefer them to be. The main thing to remember is how much this will affect the fit of the garment in the end. This pattern was designed for an approximately 1 centimetre gap between each of the shirring rows, but this is up to you if you want to stick with that or you want to do your own thing. Adding to or reducing the height of the shirring rows for the front of the bodice can alter the fit of the bodice to the bust. So if you have a larger or a smaller bust and you would like to adjust the fit slightly, you can simply add 1 or 2 rows or reduce the number of rows by 1 or 2, and this will mean that you're able to accommodate a larger bust or a smaller chest. Totally up to you. Once all of our shirring is complete, we're going to put together the front and the back of our bodice. We're going to sew the side seams together, and then we're going to finish off the seam allowance. This is best done for shirring with an overlocker. However, you can also use pinking shears or a zigzag stitch. Pinking shears are not a great choice for shirring. It can be done. It's nowhere near as secure of a way to finish off your seams. At this point, we're also going to finish off the very bottom edge of our bodice. This is running all the way around the bottom. For some people, this will mean using an overlocker or a serger, and for others, this will be a zigzag stitch or pinking shears. Again, a serger or overlocker for shirring is the most solid choice. If you did not cut all of your elastic out in the beginning, as it says in the instructions, now is a really good time to do it. We're at step 11, which means that you can go back to page 10, see the full cut list for all the elastics, cut them out and make sure that you label them or have a way of knowing which piece is which. They are fairly close in size, each of the pieces that you need, so it's important that you know which piece is which. We're now going to start working on our straps, which will also have elastic added to them. Once we add these straps to the bodice, it will create a full arm thigh ready for us to insert the sleeves. Fold each of the 2 strap pieces in half lengthways and then press really well. Now you're going to sew 1 line basically through the center of these straps, a little bit less than depending on the size of your elastic. This line is making your straps into an elastic casing. They will have raw edges on one side, and then they will have the elastic casing on the side with the fold. You can also choose to top stitch that folded edge so that it looks far more similar to how we finished off the top edge of the bodice. We're now going to insert our elastic into the casing of our straps, and we're going to secure that elastic inside the casing by doing a back stitch at the short end of each of your straps so that you can secure the elastic inside their casings. Try to keep these back stitches inside the seam allowance. Now we just need to quickly finish the seam allowance on the short ends of both sets of our straps. Repeat this for both the front and back of the bodice, inserting the elastic into their casings and securing each of those pieces of elastic's ends with back stitches. And now we can finish our bodice assembly by adding the straps to the top of the bodice. This can be the trickiest part of putting together this pattern, just because of how everything lines up together and making sure that we don't have too many stitching lines on show. When you're pinning your straps in, the strap is going to go to the inside of the bodice, right side to wrong side, so that both right sides are facing inward or outward, whichever way you have them around. And you're going to also make sure that the fold line of the straps, where that elastic is is facing inwards towards the center of the garment so that the raw edges of the bodice are lined up with the raw edges of the strap. Then you're going to pin the straps into place. You're going to align them either using the notches that I've already put in the pattern, or you can align them so that the bottom of the strap's short edge is in line with the bottom folded edge at the top of the bodice. See what I mean? There's a lot of words. To stitch the strap in place, you're going to follow the same stitch lines that you had on the front of the bodice. So you're going to stitch right back over all three of those lines, but this time you're stitching down the strap to the top of the bodice. Repeat this for all straps at the front and at the back of the bodice. We've now completed the bodice. It has straps which create the armholes. You can see the full neckline as well as the back of the neckline, and we can now move on to creating our sleeves. The first step in creating our sleeves is to fold them together, right sides in, wrong sides facing out, so that the long edges below the curve of the shoulder line up matching each other. Pin them together and then stitch using the same seam allowance we've used for the whole pattern, and then finish off that seam. This will make it look like instead of sleeves, you have two tubes. You're now going to run gathering stitches along the top of the sleeve cap. Try to keep these neatly close together and, if possible, inside the seam allowance. If not, make sure that you're using a contrasting thread so that you can pop it out after you've finished making the dress. Your 2 rows of gathering stitches should be parallel to each other and go around the curve from notch to notch, using the pattern as a guide. When you separate out the top threads of each of these gathering threads, you should be able to pull on them and your fabric should gather up into nice little pleaty gathery sections that are able to then be fitted to that arm side that we just created in the bodice. Turn the sleeve right sides out and then put this into the bodice so that you can match up the arm side of the sleeve with the bodice's arm side, or armhole if you're someone who doesn't know what an arm side is. That's totally cool. We're here for beginners too. Pin the sleeve head into the arm side, starting this pinning by lining up the side seam with the sleeve seam so that they match together. As you're pinning, you may need to stretch out some of the back of the bodice so that it is flat and isn't gathered because of its shirring stitches. We want to make sure that the fabric of our sleeve is flat with the fabric of our bodice. We're not taking into account any of these puckers or gathers because of that shirring elastic or any other elastic. I like to pin all the way around the bottom of my sleeve and then do the strap at the top afterwards, just to make sure everything's as even as possible. When you're doing the strap at the top, again, you want to make sure that it's as flat as possible and as stretched out as possible. We're not taking into account the elastic. We can now take our garment over to our sewing machine and we can sew around that arm side, attaching the sleeve to the bodice. Don't stitch through the elastic in your strap. You will go through probably some of the elastic that's gone through the bodice front when it comes all the way across to the side. That's fine, but that long piece of elastic that goes through the top of the sleeve head, we really don't want to go through that. We want to just leave that as it is with no stitching through it. We really don't want to sew through the elastic that we have inside that strap. Repeat this for both sleeves and then take your bodice over to your overlocker, serger, or use a zigzag stitch to finish off the raw edges of that sleeve where it attaches to the bodice. So both the bodice and the sleeve should have their edges finished off where you've attached them at the arm. Now we're going to do the cuff of our sleeve. In the pictures in the instruction as well as in the video, mine has been overlocked. This is because the piece of fabric I was using had overlocking on the edge, and not because you're supposed to have it overlocked. So ignore that. What we're going to do is we're going to do a double fold of the hem of our sleeve so that we can create a casing for more elastic. The folds of our cuff actually match the folds that we did at the top of our bodice. So we're going to fold that hem of the cuff by 1 centimeter, press it, and then fold it up again by 3 centimeters and press it again. So this is folded inside the sleeve so that we are then creating that elastic casing that's almost invisible. Repeat this for both sleeves, and then we're going to take it over to our sewing machine. This is a good time to take that little front casing off your sewing machine arm if you can. And this means that you can then place your sleeve over your actual sewing machine as you're stitching it, doing your top stitching. This is much simpler. We're now going to stitch around our cuff, and we're going to use about a 2.5 centimeter seam allowance so that we're right on the edge there next to the bottom folded edge. We need to make sure, very importantly, that we leave a gap for inserting our elastic. So you're going to back stitch at the start, get all the way around, leave about 3 centimeter gap unstitched, and just back stitch at the end there a little bit as well. And then we get to move on to adding our elastic. Feed your elastic through this new casing at the cuff of your sleeve using either a bodkin like I do, or you can use a safety pin. It's also helpful to have a safety pin to add to the other end of your elastic so that you can hold it to your fabric of your project so that it doesn't accidentally slip all the way through to the other side. To finish your elastics, simply overlap them by about 1.5 centimeters to 2 centimeters, and then zigzag stitch over the overlaps to hold them in place. Back stitch back and forth a few times so that you create a really strong hold. Then, using a straight stitch, you can close up the gap in the hem of the sleeve. If you are making the cropped version of the Danu, you now need to just finish off your bottom hem, fold up to the wrong side, the inside, that bottom hem by as small a margin as you can, about 1 centimeter. If you'd prefer it to be slightly more cropped, you can go a little bit further than that again. Then stitch that hem down with a straight stitch all the way around. The very, very final step is to make sure that you press and steam your shirring as well, really, really well. So you're going to press the rest of the garment and then you're going to steam your shirring really well. This helps all of the shirring elastic bunch up and come back to its right size so that it's ready for you to wear. And now you have your cropped version of the Danu. If you want to make one of the other views, keep watching and I'll show you how to attach a skirt or a peplum. To create the skirt or the peplum uses the exact same steps. For the video, I'm going to be showing you using the full skirt version, which is view A of the Danu dress and top, but all of these steps are equally the same with the peplum version. The only difference is how long you make it. To cut out the skirt or the peplum for your desired garment, simply follow the instructions on page 9, which gives you a grid of measurements so that you can cut out your pieces ready to make your top or your dress. Once you have cut out your 2 panels, you then need to overlock, serge, or zigzag stitch around all 4 edges of each panel. So that's 8 edges in total that you're going to take through your overlocker or your sewing machine to finish off the entire rectangle of fabric for each. Once the seams have been finished, you can now sew together your panels at the side seams. Just simply lay them right sides together, wrong sides facing out, and stitch up 2 sides, one on either side. We're now going to hem the skirt. Because we've overlocked it, we actually don't need to do a double fold, but you can if you wish to. I'm just going to fold mine up by 4 centimeters and then press really well all the way around. And then I'm going to top stitch that hem down so that everything stays in place. We need to stitch in some gathering rows at the top of our skirt or our peplum. This is done the same way that we did it for the sleeve head, but rather than just doing it from notch to notch, we're going to do from side to side. This is easiest if you do a set of gathering stitches on the front of the skirt and then a separate set on the back of the skirt, rather than trying to do 2 really massive single rows all the way around. We're going to use those gathering stitches to reduce the top of the skirt size so that it's the same as the bottom of the bodice. This is the bodice fully stretched out, not the bodice really tiny. It shouldn't be the same size as the bodice with its shirring elastic all smooshed down. This should be the same size as the bodice stretched out without worrying about the shirring elastic. Place the bodice inside the skirt. The bodice should be right sides facing out. The skirt should be right sides facing in, wrong sides out. And then you're going to align the side seams of the bodice with the skirt and pin that in place. Then you need to evenly pin the bodice and the skirt together. I like to go half and half first, doing the very center of the front panel and the center of the back panel, just to make it easier to make sure everything is really evenly spaced. You're then going to sew the skirt and the bodice together at that seam using a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. As you're sewing, you need to both keep the gathering stitches gathering even and also stretch out your shirring. This can be a little bit tricky because there's so much going on, but it can be done. Go slowly and take your time as you work your way around the skirt. At this point, you have your dress or your top. If you'd like to, there is one more step to go if you want to make it a more stable creation. To add stability to this seam, we're going to add a loop of elastic to this waist seam. You're just going to measure out the right amount of elastic and cut it, and then you're going to sew it together, the 2 ends of the elastic, to create a loop. This is done the same way as we did it for our sleeve cuffs, but this time it's not inside something already. So you're just going to overlap the 2 ends and then zigzag stitch over that again. Place this loop over the seam allowance of the waist of your dress, and then you're going to evenly distribute the elastic around the waist. The elastic will look a little bit bigger than the dress because of the shirring. You're going to then take it to your sewing machine, and using a zigzag stitch, you're going to stitch the elastic to the seam allowance rather than to either the bodice or the skirt. It's actually just to that seam allowance that you have in the center there. As you're sewing, gently stretch the elastic and the dress so that they match sizes as you go around. This will also mean that it will keep both the elastic and the dress flexible to move around your body and to stretch over your body as you're taking the dress on and off. Finally, press the seam allowance with the included elastic up towards the bodice, and then you're going to steam everything, press everything, and your Danu dress or top is finished. Congratulations!